Welcome to Joey Jackson on the Law. Welcome to Joey Jackson on the Law, where we are talking all things Epstein. And talking about Epstein, let us talk first and foremost about the depositions, of one Les Wexner. Now, who is he? Who is Les Wexner? Les Wexner happens to be a billionaire. He happens to be 88 years young. And he happens to be a person who owns Ohio. Now, I say that in a flippant way, but when I say owns Ohio, he's got plenty of money. He's got all kind of buildings named after him. And he is also a very, very good friend of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, why is he relevant? He's relevant because this House committee, this oversight committee, who's investigating these Epstein files and investigating the people associated with Epstein, brought him in for a deposition. Now, when did that happen? It happened on February 18, 2026, where they said, "We want to speak to you." Now, when I say brought him in for deposition, I use that term very loosely. It's nice to be a billionaire because they went to him. They went to his home, you could say. It was his estate. And when I say them, there's this committee. And on that committee in the House, they have both Democrats and Republicans. But for some strange reason, not one Republican member showed up. Now, I thought this was a search for the truth. And as a search for the truth, you would expect and anticipate that members of Congress, be they Democrat or Republican, would all show up and would all have questions so that they could inquire as to his relationship with Epstein, how long he's known Epstein. What was the nature of that relationship? What did they do together? Whether he was involved in any of these illicit or criminal activities. What did they do ultimately, right, when they were involved? What kind of business transactions did they have together? All of those things you would expect to be fair game for both parties, but no, it was not. What it was only the Republicans showed up and asked questions. The Democrats showed up and asked questions. The Republicans decided to stay home. Now, in that regard, let's just talk a little bit about who he is and why he's got all these buildings named after him. All right. So we know he's the founder of things like Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, Abercrombie and Fitch. You might know them a little bit, right? But that's not the basis of it. The basis of it was because of the money he made doing those things. And not even the money he made. In a capitalistic society, you can make all the money you want. It really boiled down to his relationship with Epstein. In fact, he was a friend and associate of Epstein since the 1980s. Yes, you heard me. Decades long. And it's largely believed that Epstein was a billionaire with a B because of his association, of course, with Wexner, and as a result of the business relationship that he enjoyed with Wexner. So you'd figure that Wexner might have some knowledge into who Epstein was, what he was doing, when he was doing it, and who he was doing it with. And that was the reason why that this House Oversight Committee brought him in for this deposition. Now, there's about 26 Republican members, 21 or so Democratic members. We know that the House of Representatives is Republically controlled. We know that there are various committees. These committees have various functions. This Oversight Committee, that function is to investigate. And part of that investigation was to conduct this deposition. Now, I've said deposition a number of times. What is that? A deposition is when you bring someone in for questioning. You swear them to tell the truth. They raise their right hand and they say under oath that I have something to say and I'm going to be truthful in saying it. And so too did they bring him in, that is Wexner. In bringing him in, they had various questions for him. And let's just talk about the essence of his testimony. The essence of his testimony was that he was certainly not aware, according to him, of any of these illicit activities that Mr. Epstein was engaged in. He, according to him, was not aware of anything involving criminality, of anything involving inappropriate contact, inappropriate relationships, or anything else. And based upon that, he was saying he had no knowledge of anything Epstein may have been doing. Now, members took issue with that, not only because of the decades-long relationship he enjoyed with him, but there was also the issue of how Epstein made his money. It's said that Epstein made about $1 billion, or at least $1 billion was transferred to Epstein from Wexner over the course of their relationship. And because of that, it was a sense that he would know an awful lot about Epstein. There was also the accusation that Epstein would use Victoria's Secret. Did we mention Victoria's Secrets and his ownership of that? And he would use that is Epstein, in order to get these young models to come in and then exact whatever abuse he was engaged in on them. And so there was a sense that he would, Wexner, come in and know everything about anything. Not so fast. Now, when we mention these buildings, he had a football complex, or has, I shouldn't say had, football complex named after him in Ohio. He's got certainly a medical center. He's got a center of fine arts named after him. Whole bunch of things, because he's a baller, okay? But what happened is he essentially said, that is Wexner, that Epstein is a world-class con man, that he's a manipulator, that Epstein, in fact, stole hundreds of millions of dollars from him, that he had no idea, again, what Epstein was doing, and of course, he was never involved in any such illicit activities. Now, it stands to mention, and we should say, that he, Wexner, is mentioned about 1,300 times in the files. It also stands to be said that there is, in effect, some accusations that he needed to answer. The one was that there was he was named as a co-conspirator with Epstein in an actual federal prosecution. And as part of that federal prosecution, it was noted that he was involved in some kind of criminality. He says he knew nothing about being a co-conspirator. That is, Wexner said. Wexner said he cut ties with Epstein in 2007 and had no idea again and again, Epstein doing anything to him other than taking his money, and not only taking his money, but conning him. In addition to that, he was asked about any relationship he might have had with Virginia Giuffre. Now, Virginia Giuffre, remember, she was a survivor. And as a survivor, she alleged that she was trafficked by Epstein to Wexner. He said that's ridiculous. And he didn't know anything about Virginia Giuffre at all and wasn't involved. And in terms of the 2019 prosecution agreement as a co-conspirator, again, he says that that's news to him and that he was involved in no such activities. He's got no idea about anything other than being mentioned 1,300 times. Now, he did mention that he cut ties with Epstein in 2007, but there was an email or emails that contradicted that noted that in 2008, he was communicating with Epstein, unlike what he said, and that, in fact, there was some kind of indication that he was part of Epstein's personal contact till as late as 2017. So you draw from those inferences whatever you want, but he notes that they were just professional associates. When also confronted with some birthday card that he was presented with that showed he gave to Epstein that said, "your friend," he said, that's what I always use. I use "your friend" for purposes of like it's in regards, or have a great day, or nice to know you. He says he used his friends. There was also a letter release showing that Epstein wrote to him talking about how they collectively engaged in quote unquote gang stuff, and how they had for 15 years shared secrets. He said he never got the letter, doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. And again, all of this would be news to him. And so, based upon the testimony that he gave, based upon the several hours in which he was there, I think different minds can differ as to whether he was telling the truth or not telling the truth. But the essence of his certainly testimony was that he knows nothing about nothing. Epstein is a con man. He doesn't know anything about any prosecution, co-conspiratorship. He knows nothing about Virginia Giuffre or any other accusation that was made by him by survivors, and that he has nothing to say or otherwise to tell that would be otherwise incriminating. And in terms of any inconsistencies, he just notes that, listen, take for whatever it will. I'm just a person who was involved in his orbit, and I was taken advantage of just like everyone else. Welcome to Joey Jackson on the Law, where we are talking all things Epstein. And today we're talking about Hillary Clinton. Why? Because she was deposed by this House Oversight Committee. What does that mean? It means she gave sworn testimony on February 26, 2026. In giving sworn testimony, she showed up and she answered questions of the committee. Now, we know there was some fireworks. She threatened to leave. for good reason, because it was supposed to be private. There was a leaked photo of her. She wasn't having anything to do with it. But once the smoke settled and was cleared, we know that she testified for about 4.5 hours to that committee. And here's the essence of what she had to say. Now, let's just be clear. I will always explain what goes on, and that is a deposition is giving sworn testimony. That's when you swear under oath, you raise your right hand, and you're asked various questions, and you give various answers. Now, she was there, that is Hillary Clinton, because there was some belief that she might have had something to do with at least, or knowledge of, I should say, who Epstein was, what he was up to, what was the nature of her relationship with him, what she knew, when she knew it, but not so fast, because the essence of what she had to say, that is Hillary Clinton, is that this is pure political theater, her words, not mine, and that it was largely, according to her, a waste of time, and that it was just a distraction, and this is something that is purely political in nature that is not going to get this committee any further to the truth. Now, interestingly enough, unlike the Les Wexner deposition, he happens to be a major Republican donor, by the way, Les Wexner, where no Republican showed up for his deposition. Well, that was not the case with Hillary. There were Democrats and Republicans who showed up, as it should be, because we certainly want to get to the truth. And in getting to the truth, she was questioned by both parties. Now, the essence of her testimony is that she never had a private meeting with Epstein, that she saw him in terms of social events from afar, where there were large crowds and groups, that she didn't have any intimate or other communication with him at all, and that there was no connection or nexus between him and her, and Epstein in any regard. And so she essentially was not knowing why she was there. What was the basis of having me here, according to Hillary, in the event that I don't have anything to give you? And in terms of questions about her husband, I guess it could be said that things should be asked to Bill Clinton. She's not Bill Clinton. Yes, she's the spouse of Bill Clinton. Yes, Hillary Clinton in her own right is a political force. We know her as the Secretary of State under Obama. We know her as a United States Senator from New York. We know her as the First Lady of the United States when her husband, Bill Clinton, was in service. But essentially, her testimony was that she had nothing to do at all with Mr. Epstein and didn't even know him, quite frankly. Now, on the issue of Ghislaine Maxwell, we know who she is. She is the person associated with Epstein, a girlfriend of Epstein, a person that was intimately involved with Epstein, and a person who it was felt enabled Epstein, and was only not only felt that way, she was, of course, convicted and prosecuted because of the fact that she was in line with Epstein, and the Southern District of New York brought a case against her, for which they obtained this conviction. So we know, in fact, that her hands were not entirely clean. In fact, many would say that they were quite dirty. They asked her, that is Hillary, about Ghislaine Maxwell and her association, and essentially she said that she might have been an acquaintance, but not someone with whom she was intimately familiar, that it was a casual acquaintance relationship. And again, with respect to her husband was certainly involved in the Clinton Foundation, was certainly involved in humanitarian missions in that regard, in terms of raising money for the Clinton Foundation. And collectively, they were doing what they needed to do. But there's nothing untoward, inappropriate, and certainly not illegal by virtue of anything that she was doing, any relationship that she might have had. But let's be clear. What Miss Clinton did was distance herself from him, that is Epstein, in every regard. And in terms of Ghislaine Maxwell, same thing. Now let's talk about what might be viewed as contrary to that. She was shown a photograph, in terms of 1993, and being shown this White House photograph in 1993. I guess she was saying that, a lot of people visit the White House. I take a lot of pictures with anyone. You could show me a picture of me with Epstein or anybody else or Maxwell or whoever you want, but I take pictures with everyone and anyone, and that proves nothing other than there's a photograph of me. She was confronted with the fact that Maxwell was one of 400 invited guests at her daughter Chelsea's wedding in 2010. And why was that the case if Maxwell was just an associate or a casual person who she had a relationship with? And she made clear, Hillary did, that she doesn't manage these lists in terms of anything about guest lists for a wedding. She's not in charge of that. And that apparently Maxwell was a guest of a guest, which she happened to come based upon that relationship, but it wasn't a personal phone call. Hey, I want you at my daughter's wedding in 2010. She did say, and this is getting some traction, that I don't recall 250 times, but she said that, look, if you don't recall, you don't recall. And she was asked questions. She didn't specifically recall. And as a result, that's the answer she gave. She made clear that she never went to his private island. She never went. Hillary Clinton did not to his home. Hillary Clinton did not go to his office. Hillary Clinton made clear that there was not that nature of a relationship or connection at all with her and Epstein, and that they were simply the Republicans engaged in a fishing expedition. Now, it was also brought to her attention that the Clinton Foundation had accepted financial support from him, that is Epstein, after his 2008 conviction. And in terms of that, what Hillary Clinton made clear was that while that might have been a mistake of the foundation to do so, that she was not involved in any way or in any regard with the day-to-day activities of that foundation and didn't make those calls. But of course, she noted that that would have been a mistake. And as a result of that, it shouldn't have been done. But ultimately, what she did say in her 4.5 hours of active questioning and testimony is that you're barking down the wrong tree. There's nothing to see here. I don't know anything about any illegality. And again, stuck to her guns in terms of this just being a political witch hunt for which she was unjustly and unfairly being called to be questioned. Now, again, when called to be questioned, the committee make arrangements to have this done in Chappaqua, which of course we know is where her and her husband live, in order to accommodate her. But depending upon who you ask, you'll get different answers. The Democrats will tell you that she was engaging. She was not defensive. She was lawyerly. She answered the questions that were posed to her and didn't appear to hide anything at all. And of course, the Republicans say that she engaged in inconsistencies. Who you decide to believe is up to you. The video's out there. You can view it yourself. But that's the essence and a summary of what she said in this deposition and her testimony. Welcome to Joey Jackson on the Law, where we are talking all things Epstein. And today we're talking about Bill Clinton. That's right. You remember him, William Jefferson Clinton, former president of the United States of America. And what do we know about him? We know he was called for a deposition for the Epstein files on February 27, 2026, a day after his wife Hillary Clinton went. Now, this is a fascinating fact, and that is that he's the first former president in 43 years to be called before Congress. Wow, are we in interesting times. And just so that you know who the other one was, that was Gerald Ford. And there was another call before him, but I digress. In any event, it's been a long time since a former president was called before this committee, but this is Jeffrey Epstein. People certainly want accountability. The survivors want accountability. That's why these files were released. These files were released so they can be evaluated and looked at and be otherwise assessed who's accountable, who knew what Epstein was doing, when did they know it, how did they know it, what was the nature of their association with him. Now, Bill Clinton, throughout the course of his testimony, about 4.5 hours or so, he, of course, started out by saying, I know nothing and I did nothing. So he made it quite clear that he had nothing to do with any illegality. Now, one of the things that he had to explain was apparently there were 26 flights that he took on Epstein's jet, the Lolita Express. And that would have been, in early 2000, 2002, 2003. And there were flights to Africa, to Europe, to Asia. But remember, what he noted, that is Clinton, was that he was involved in the Clinton Foundation. And as a result of the Clinton Foundation, he was on humanitarian missions. And he made clear that he was on that plane to save lives in Africa, not to engage in social frolicking or doing anything else. He also made clear, Bill Clinton did, that he never visited any private island, that he did not have any close relationship with Epstein, that he really didn't converse with him, much, if at all, in terms of these rides, and that it was a professional relationship based upon building this foundation and ensuring that the foundation was able to do the charitable work that it did. He noted that Epstein was a donor who provided transportation, and that was the essence of it. And again, that they didn't speak much at all during the course of these flights. While the relationship was cordial, he said, involving Epstein, that is Bill Clinton, he made it clear that although cordial, that they were not close. He also was very clear, Bill Clinton was, that he cut ties with Epstein after his 2008 conviction. Now, just to be clear, not to go far afield, we know that there was an investigation done of Epstein in Florida, right? 2005, 2006. A lot of things were happening, and he could have been Epstein stopped a long time ago, but he wasn't. And he was able, with his billions, to buy himself out of trouble, knowing these connections. Alex Acosta was the U.S. attorney in Florida at the time. He got a sweetheart deal wherein he was, that is, Epstein, able to plead guilty to 2 state charges, even though the feds had this indictment under wraps that had up to 60 counts, felony counts of things that he did wrong. But I digress. Bill Clinton said he cut ties with him after his state conviction in 2008. So by the time he was arrested and charged for his crimes in 2019, Bill Clinton said, I didn't even know what the guy was doing. And that me, like everybody else in the world, was shocked and surprised to learn that he would have even been arrested for these horrific crimes. And he made clear, Bill Clinton did, that he certainly had no knowledge of any activities that were illicit or otherwise, and that there's nothing to see here with respect to any activities that he might have engaged in that might have been illegal, improper, or anything else. Now, he was confronted, that is Bill Clinton, with some information, and he was confronted with the notion of, hey, isn't it fair to say that you, in fact, did know him a lot more than that? And not only that, but the plane that you were on stopped at his private island. Bill Clinton made clear that he was never on the private island. While the plane may have stopped there, maybe he got off prior. He was logged on the initial flight, but maybe he got off prior to it going to the private island, because he swore that he had no recollection at all of being on the private island. Apparently, the Secret Service gave some indication that they had some discomfort being there. He said, look, I have Secret Service with me. What Secret Service did is up to them. I just can tell you that I never was on a private island. I wasn't involved in anything inappropriate. And in fact, I just essentially don't know what you're talking about. Now, what ended up happening is that for years, Bill Clinton and his people have noted that they took about 4 flights on the plane, and they were confronted with information about these 26 flights. And so he explained, that is, Bill Clinton did, that, might have been due to information at that time, might have been done to faulty information in terms of the 26 flights versus the 4 flights. But no matter how many flights, Bill Clinton stuck to the notion that he did not engage in any illegality, he did not engage in any impropriety, and that he certainly had no knowledge of anything that Epstein was doing. Now, how he did depends upon who you ask. Obviously, the Republicans say he was evasive, that he has something to hide, that he's lying, that he's otherwise not being forthcoming, wherein, right, you have the Democrats who say that he answered the questions truthfully, he gave information accurately with respect to what he could recall, that him saying, I don't recall 400 times was a function of his memory now existing. And what else is he going to say if he does not have a specific recollection as to the facts and circumstances of exactly what occurred? But at the end of the day, Bill Clinton went in there, did what he needed to do. Now, Bill Clinton, we should note, the committee came to Chappaqua, where he's now living. They interviewed him there. And unlike, again, Les Wexner and what happened in terms of only the Democrats showing up, you better believe that both the Democrats and the Republicans were there to ask him questions. They took turns asking him questions about his associations with Epstein, about his knowledge of Epstein, about what Epstein was doing and everything else. And Bill Clinton continued to say he doesn't know. He was confronted with a picture that showed him, I'm sure the world has seen it by now, apparently he's in some tub or pool or wherever he is, and there's a woman there, and he's like, he had no sexual relations with this woman. He doesn't even remember the event, and in fact, he doesn't know who the woman was, okay? So that was the essence of his testimony, and that is what he had to tell the committee. And at the end of the day, what he's saying is, I did nothing, I know nothing, I saw nothing, and I don't have anything to contribute that would get you any closer to the truth than you were before you called me to testify before this committee. This is Joey Jackson on the Law. We appreciate you watching. God bless, stay safe, and stay tuned, because there's a lot more to come by way of depositions and other information and all things Jeffrey Epstein.